Hi, good afternoon. Um, this is actually my second to last lunch and learn here, so a little, it's getting to be bittersweet. Um, if anyone has any suggestions, you can go to the Rebbitzin about who could maybe take over this spot. We're searching for someone, um, but actually, I was learning something, and it felt very relevant to me personally in this I'm in a very transitional stage. Um, this felt very relevant to me in this transitional stage, but I think it's something that we can all find meaning in regarding this week's Parsha. So this week is Parshas Pinchas, and there's a lot of the more famous stories of Parshas Pinchas. We have Pinchas defending Hashem's honor, and all the drama that goes along with that. And then another thing that comes up in this week's Parsha, and this actually also extends into the story of the Benos Tzalevchad, the story of the daughters of Tzalevchad, who, this big question of inheritance when there are no sons, if it can go to the daughters, that comes up. And the reason this discussion comes up is because in this week's Parsha is when the land of Eretz Yisrael was divided. The land of Israel was divided into the different halakim. Every person in the Jewish people received a portion of land in Eretz Yisrael. And how was the land divided? The land was divided by a gorel, through like a raffle. That was how the land was divided, through a raffle. And the interesting thing about this raffle is that Rashi tells us, based on some of the words that it says about this raffle, Rashi tells us that the raffle actually spoke its results. So we have this inanimate object speaking its results. So in the modern world that we live in, it doesn't even seem so weird. Like you can imagine a raffle that announces the results, like a little machine that you pull and it talks and tells you what it is. But back then, it was quite the miraculous feat for the raffle to be talking. It was a miracle. And the question is asked, why did this miracle happen? What was the purpose of this miracle? We know that Hashem doesn't just make miracles for no reason. Hashem makes a miracle. Hashem generally works within nature, that natural order rules. And when there's a great need, that's when a miracle happens. But miracles are just not like randomly thrown out. So why did this raffle have to speak? Why was this miracle necessary? So you might say that the miracle was necessary to prove the divine nature of the raffle. That this wasn't just a random occurrence of pulling a name and pulling, right? You put in the name and you choose the plot of land and you match them up. And it wasn't just that. It wasn't just random. It was showing that this raffle is saying God's will. This is the means for Hashem's will to be expressed. So in that way, the fact that there's a miracle makes that very obvious, right? That it's something miraculous. Obviously, this is God's will. But actually, before each raffle was pulled, Elazar, the Kohen Gadol, not the Kohen Gadol, he was the Kohen, the son, he became the Kohen Gadol, he was Aaron's son. Elazar, the Kohen, announced with Ruach HaKodesh what the results of the raffle was going to be. So before each raffle, he said, this is what the raffle is going to say. And then they pulled the raffle, and it was the same results that he said. So there already you have the proof that there's some Ruach HaKodesh going on in this raffle, right? That fact that there's already this predictive nature to show that Hashem is the one who's really deciding these results. So why does it have to be that the raffle itself is also speaking? That seems like an extra miracle. So to answer this question, we're gonna go on a little journey. So obviously, every element that is in Torah is relevant to every single person at every single time in every single space that we are living. The Torah is eternal, and there's nothing that is just for one time. And everything about it is always relevant for us. The interesting thing is, and the Rebbe talks about this, that right now we are actually living in a very interesting time. And this is true about right now, as in like the generation that we're living in, but also right now, as in the time period that we are in right now, which is the 3 weeks between Shiva Asar B'Tammuz and Tisha B'Av. This week is Shabbos Mevarchim Av. We're going to be entering into the month of Av. And these weeks are actually called the Bein HaMetzarim, between the gates kind of thing. But like, what does that mean? That between, it shows that actually the time that we're in right now is a transitional time. And the Rebbe emphasizes that we've been in a very transitional time for, let's say, the past little bit. We've been transitioning from a state of galus into a state of geula. That Mashiach is going to be here now, right? Like Mashiach is coming. But right now, the reality is, and there's a certain reality that we have to face, is that it has not been revealed yet, right? So we're in this very in-between phase. Where if you can experience geula if you choose to, if you open your eyes, but at the same time we are still in galus, and so we're in this in-between phase between galus and geula. And the question is, like, in this time, where are our minds supposed to be? Where are we supposed to be at? Is our head supposed to be completely within the geula, or is our head supposed to be in galus? Where are we supposed to be? So there's an interesting teaching of the Tzemach Tzedek, and this wasn't actually a widely publicized teaching until the Friediger Rebbe actually publicized this as a widely publicized teaching. This was actually advice that the Tzemach Tzedek gave to an individual, to one person, and then the Friediger Rebbe publicized it many years later, and it became sort of like general advice for everyone. And the famous teaching is that a chassid of the Tzemach Tzedek came to the Tzemach Tzedek, and he was debating if he should move to Eretz Yisrael or he should stay in Russia where he was, and the Tzemach Tzedek told him, Machda Eretz Yisrael, make Eretz Yisrael here. That Eretz Yisrael is not just a place, it's not just a physical space. Eretz Yisrael is a mindset. Eretz Yisrael is a certain headspace that you can be in, and you can create that reality for yourself over here. And the Friediger Rebbe publicized this as advice for everyone, that we all have the power to make Eretz Yisrael here. That even in the diaspora, even in Galus, we have the ability to create that Eretz Yisrael is here. Just yesterday, I would play it if I had a screen because it's like so perfect. But just yesterday, someone sent me this comedy piece of a guy who's talking about the word here. And he's talking about how, why am I even saying this? There's nothing funny about someone saying a comedy piece, but I'll try anyway. But he's talking about like how useless the word here is. Because if I'm speaking to someone and they're, somewhere else, I'm on the phone, I'm saying, I'm here. Where's here? What is here? Here is only where you are at right now. Even if someone asks you, oh, where should I put that down? I'll say, oh, put it down over here, but then I have to point because here is here, but like there's no, right? Like where is here? Here moves with you. Here moves with you wherever you are. And so on some level, as a word, it's useless because it's not really communicating something to somebody else, right? So as a word, it doesn't really have any value. But as a concept, that concept is actually, I don't think the guy realized as he was saying this, but I don't think he realized how deep it is, that here moves with you wherever you are. That here is wherever you are. And tuning into that concept of here, I am here, is something that actually can be extremely difficult for us because we're very often living to be there, right? We have aspirations where we want to go. Where do we want to be? And so we're imagining the there and we're working towards getting there. And then where your aspirations are is where your mind is where you then end up being. And then you're not here, even though you're really here, right? You end up being there. And so there's this idea that we can make this reality of Eretz Yisrael be here wherever we are, and that can move with us wherever we go. And what does that mean to make Eretz Yisrael be over here? We live in a time when maybe it's a lot more simple than the time of the Tzemach Tzedek to actually physically go to Eretz Yisrael. We could easily just, hop on a plane. Maybe it's a little more complicated these days and it doesn't always work out, but it is still a pretty accessible thing to actually go to Eretz Yisrael and be in Eretz Yisrael over there. So what is this idea of like making Eretz Yisrael here? So we talk about what was the gorel, the introduction for? What was the gorel? What was the intention of this gorel? The gorel was dividing the land. And then after the land was divided, what was the next step? The next step was that they actually went into Eretz Yisrael and conquered it. The kivush of the land, the conquering of the land. The interesting thing is that this gorel didn't actually go into effect. People didn't get their own individual chelak, their own individual nachla, until the entire land was conquered. Because on some level, that wouldn't even be fair, right? If we enter into Israel at this place and we conquer this place, but then the next place we're only going to conquer in a few months or next year, right? So then it's not fair to divide the land yet when it's not fully conquered. We need to have the entire land to be conquered, and then we can create these divisions and give each individual family their own space. So in order for the conquering to be complete, in order for the conquering to be considered like complete, the entire land had to be conquered. It couldn't just be one area or another area. That was one thing about the conquering. And then we can say that in order for the conquering to be like a true conquering, and this is something that I think we see evidence of until today, we see this very practically playing out in the world right now, that you could conquer a land and you can conquer it completely, and you can have control over it lemaisa, in actuality. But if you want the conquering to be complete, and especially in the sense that we said that why did we go into Eretz Yisrael? To turn it into a land of holiness, to turn it into a space where God is revealed. So if you want the conquering to be complete, it can't just be a physical action. It has to permeate into the person who's conquering it, into the conqueror, that this is your land, that you have conquered this, that this is now a holy place. I think we see this playing out in Israel sometimes, that now, maybe we physically conquer it, but even the people who are conquering it maybe have a little dissonance that in their heads that this is ours. And unless you believe that firmly, strongly in your head, what even ends up in like the physical reality is that we lose our confidence in the fact that it's ours. So for it to truly be conquered, it needs to be conquered in action, but it also needs to be conquered in our minds, in machshava, and it also has to be conquered in our mouths, in our dibor, that we know that this is actually our land. It's not enough for it just to be, for me to have soldiers that are physically defending the land. I need to speak like this is actually mine, given to me from God, to create a godly space. I need to think in my head that this is mine, given to me from God, to create this godly space. For something to be truly, so we're defining that conquering something is not just a superficial action, but it has to include the entire self. The entire self, if you really want it to be yours, if you really want to take ownership of something, your whole self has to be on board. If you really want to, because we're talking about sharing we're talking about declaring that this is, we're talking about declaring that this is mine, and it's only going to be declared under this level of ownership if it's completely and totally permeates who we are. And in those of us who are not in Eretz Yisrael, or not living during this time of the conquering of the land, this plays out in the fact that our entire lives essentially is meant to be conquering the world. Right? In the first command that was given to Adam HaRishon was to procreate, right? Pru u'revu. That Adam should pru u'revu, he should be fruitful and multiply, u'maluas haaretz, and fill the world, v'kivshuha, and conquer it. That is the command that was given to Adam. That we're not just supposed to live in this world, but we're supposed to conquer the world. And what does it mean that we're supposed to conquer this world, not just live in it? The point of conquering the world is saying that the world seems to be right now under one ownership. Whose ownership does the world seem to be under? The world on its external level seems to be under the ownership of what we might call klipa, of things that hide God. There's natural order, there's everything just speaks for itself, right? And says, I am. And that's sort of the role of klipa, to hide Hashem. So right now the world is under, or much less so for all the work that the Jewish people have been doing over the past, thousands of years to actually conquer the earth. But that was how the world was created, under the ownership of something that seemed to be external to God. And our job of conquering the earth is showing, declaring who the ownership truly is. And every time that we engage with the world in a way that declares that this is God's world, we are conquering the world and showing who the true owner is. That's how we conquer. This is how we sort of conquer Eretz Yisrael. And similarly, to the same way that when, in order for Eretz Yisrael to truly be ours and to truly be under, to truly prove that the ownership has changed, we need for it to be an extremely, not just an external process of physically owning it, but an internal process within ourselves that we too really believe for ourselves that we own this land. Similarly, in conquering the world, it's not just the physical actions that we do, where we interact with the world on a physical level, which is really, ultimately, that is the point. To physically, this is how we transform the world, is through mitzvahs, right? Through physical actions. But if you want it to be a true conquering, it needs to permeate also into our inner world. It can't just be our external world, but even on our inner world needs to be on the same page, needs to be expressing fully that we're in alignment, that we're fully aligned in this knowledge that this world is God's. And that's going to start in my thought. It's going to start in my world of intellect. It's going to go into my world of speech, into my world of expression, and also be in the world of action. But it's not just enough to do the action. We want that our intention should be aligned with our action. That when I am eating food in order to energize myself, in order to be able to do God's will, yes, in that action, I am changing the food and I'm changing the ownership of the food. But at the same time, I want that to change me. That my insides should also be becoming changed and becoming aligned with this reality. And this type of living is really a very, what we might call, a very mindful way of living. There are certain mitzvahs that are primarily done with only one of these three faculties. Let's say, right, we have thought, speech, and action. So there are certain mitzvahs that are much more thought-oriented, right? There's mitzvahs like loving Hashem and fearing Hashem. Those take place in our inner world. And then there are mitzvahs that are speech-oriented. Davening, making brachas, those are in the world of speech. And then we have mitzvahs that are action-oriented. That's many of them, right? That are just like action. Even when a mitzvah falls into one of these categories, if you are truly, truly, truly present within that mitzvah, it's going to come out into the other categories as well. So it's actually very interesting. Many, many years ago, I taught this sikha in high school about how even something like loving and fearing Hashem, which is a mind kind of mitzvah, in like big tzaddikim, it would actually come out in their physical bodies, right? It says, I think it was Rav Meir of Chernobyl actually became fat from the pleasure that he had in saying Amen Yehi Shmei Rabba, that it like satiated him on this physical level, whatever that means. Or like literally like trembling with awe of Hashem when you feel like you're standing before him. Like if it can come into your body, that's the biggest proof that it's impacted you in a real way, that you're like sensing it in its fullest truth. And this is like true about any mitzvah and really any moment, that if we are in it fully, if we want to conquer the moment, conquering the moment means being in it fully, being fully aware of where I am, being fully here. There's an interesting story of the Rebbe Rashab that there was a Farbringen in Tamchei Tamimim. This is the yeshiva that the Rebbe Rashab started, and the Bachrim were singing a nigun, and it was in preparation. The Rebbe was going to speak. So I don't know if it was going to be a sikha or a mimer or whatever. The Rebbe was going to say something. And he heard the Bachrim rushing through the nigun. Because what was the exciting thing? The exciting thing was hearing the Rebbe speak. And he stopped them and he told them, a pnimi, wherever he is there all the way. What is a pnimi? What is an internal person? What is a person who's living in a deeply aligned way, not in a superficial way, which is basically the highest compliment you can get in Hasidic terminology, is you're a pnimi, you're an internal person. You're not just living, you're living completely aligned. What is a pnimi? A pnimi, wherever they are, they're there all the way. And especially when it comes to hachana, especially when it comes to preparation, I find personally it becomes much, much more difficult to actually be fully present because we're so much looking forward to what's going to come next. I know, like, okay, I like to work out, and a big part of my workouts is actually stretching before, doing some mobility work before. Now, I just want to get to lifting the heavy stuff, right? And doing the mobility work, I sort of want to just like rush through it as fast as possible. And to make it even better, in the program that I do, before the mobility work, there's always deep breathing because apparently if you activate your parasympathetic nervous system, your sympathetic nervous system, you're able to stretch deeper. So if you're in a state of calm, your body goes into deeper movements than when it's in a state of stress, which makes sense because when you're in a state of stress, you're sort of holding back. And then when you're in a state of calm, you're able to fully get into the stretch. So your body actually becomes more flexible by being in a state of calm. Now, for me to remain present, not just in the stretching before, which I know will hopefully enhance the workout that comes after, but in the breathing that's meant to enhance the stretching. That is really tough. I just want to get to what I feel like I want to do, like to allow myself to stay present in that moment and to appreciate this for what it is right now is very, very tough. To be here in the preparation is really hard. And I think we've all experienced this on some level. You know something big is coming and you're preparing for that big thing, and just staying present in the preparation is so tough. It's hard to stay present in the moment even when we're outside of preparation, but even more so when you're in preparation. But I think we've all experienced that the better you prepare, the better the outcome, right? The more you prepare yourself for something, the more present you are within your preparations. If you take the time to, do your mise en place and cut up all your vegetables or prepare your ingredients before you start cooking, and you don't do it in a haphazard way, you do it with intention, your cooking is always going to come out better, right? These are all physical examples that we can see this in. And then how much more so with spiritual examples where we really need to where we're trying to get ourselves into a space, into a headspace. That preparation is what enables us to get into the headspace, but we have this desire to just jump into the real thing. We have this desire to just, get things over with. And so this gorel that we spoke about that was happening, right? We asked the question, why was it that the gorel had to speak? Why did Hashem make this miracle? It seems unnecessary. And the point of the gorel speaking is to show us this very point. The gorel was not an end for itself, right? What was the point of the gorel? The point of the gorel was to show who would have each portion of land, right? The point of the gorel was to show the difference of the halakim. But the gorel spoke to teach us that even in the preparation for something, we need to be fully there. And what is the biggest proof that you're fully there is that it's expressed in our thought, speech, and action. So the gorel, for itself, it already contains two of these. On its own, it contains two of these. It contains thought and it contains action. What's the thought in the gorel? The thought in the gorel is that it is shearing the intention, right? The intention of the gorel is to, show what's happening, what's going to happen in the land. And like we said previously, that even Elazar predicted what was going to happen to show that this is truly God's intention, right? So we have that machshava element within the gorel, and we have the action element, the results, right? You pull two, and you have the action. But there's no speech in the gorel. So Hashem had created this miracle that the gorel speaks to show that this gorel is fully aligned from step A to step B to step C. It's fully aligned with one purpose, to teach us that the preparation is a space where we need to be fully present. That it's not just enough to do the preparation and to just get through it haphazardly with our eye on the goal. That even when we're preparing for something, we need to step into it fully and allow ourselves to be there fully, however hard that is, because that is what makes us a pnimi, and that is also what allows us to be in the results as fully. If you're not in the preparation fully, you're not going to be fully in the results. You're not going to be fully at the destination. And that is what it means when we say making Eretz Yisrael here. Machda Eretz Yisrael, make Eretz Yisrael here. That we can conquer the land of Israel. We conquer the land of Israel. We do our conquering. We create the godly reality. We create Mashiach. We create all of these things by being present in everything that we are doing now. And especially in a time like this, like we mentioned before, like the 3 weeks, or just like this general energy that we feel that we are at the cusp of Mashiach and we are at the cusp of the revelation, there can be a desire to just jump to the results, to have our minds be floating in the results. And it's interesting because you see the Rebbe speaks about doing that also. The Rebbe speaks about living with the Mashiach reality and opening your eyes to what's true. But over here, he's saying that we need to recognize that where we are right now is where we need to be. And we can't just try to run away from it. We can't just try to run away from the tension of the transition. There's this desire to just escape it, to just stick ourselves in the results, to have our heads just be where we want to go. And the point is, no, you need to stay here. Because if you're here, there's a purpose for you being here. That where you are, the place that you find yourselves, in your small little portion, every person has their small little portion. First of all, their physical space where they just end up being, right? Your physical surroundings. But more than that, your space, as in the people who you impact, the people who you are in contact with, your space as in your job, your personality, these are all indicative. This is your space. And this is all indicative of what you need to be doing. The fact that you're in this space is the proof that this is where your work is. This is where your job is. And if we go back to the example of splitting up Israel, it says an interesting thing about the chalakim of Israel. The Jewish people might be upset. He got a better chalak than me. He has these natural resources in his, and what do I have in mine, right? Like looking at each other's chalakim and maybe being jealous of each other. And the Mefarshim say that each chalak included within it, each spot in Eretz Yisrael includes every other spot. That no one spot is better than the other. If you have one spot, you have the entire land. Because what we're talking about over here is something essential. We're not talking about the details of what this terrain looks like versus that. We're talking about this contains the spirit of Israel. And if you meet that spirit, you'll have success. If you meet that spirit, you have the land. And similarly, within our own lives, sometimes we feel like we're limited in our impact because we're in our space. Our space can limit our impact. Our space can limit what we're doing. But when we enter into it fully, your space, and you're able to be with it in a present way, then you bring your essential self to it, then you actually contain everything within it, right? When you're able to be with it when you're in the moment fully present, then every other moment is within that moment as well. You don't have to worry about the fact that my space is limited, my space is here and is not somewhere else. Because through this manner of making this be my chelak, allowing this to be my chelak of Eretz Yisrael, and the way I make it be my chelak of Eretz Yisrael is by being here. Those are the words of Tzemach Tzedek uses, that the way I turn this into my area of Eretz Yisrael is by being here. By being here, I turn this into my chelak. And by being here, I do exactly what I need to do. And I'm able to have basically everlasting and infinite impact through this power of presence. So, like I said, like we're in the 3 weeks now. We're in this grand transitional period. I know personally in my life, I'm in a very transitional period. I'm living out of suitcases at the moment. It's very transitional. And I feel that desire to not be present in that transition. It's so hard. So hard to like allow yourself to fully just settle into it. But right now we have this ability to settle into like, God wanted me to be here and present and alive during this moment of transition. And he chose my soul to be present for this. Not every soul was chosen to be in this very tumultuous and difficult time. Not every soul was chosen to be here. And my soul was chosen to be here right now. So instead of trying to escape this reality, I have to see if I can activate that every single part of myself. And sometimes this involves, just slowing down a little. Because when you're going, you're constantly looking towards the next thing. But by slowing down a little and being like, is every single part of me showing up in the space that God gave me to be in right now? I think that's a very powerful thing that we can ask ourselves. And if we can answer it with honesty, that you are here, that's really, that's the point. Then you've conquered your land of Israel, right? So yeah, we should all be able to enter into that space, be in our space in a fully present way. And with that power, hopefully then we can achieve our result, achieve the result that we're all waiting for. But because we've been here through the process, we'll be able to experience the result as it's meant to be, right?